We often think about property in terms of its growth and its yield and its financial metrics, right? And then it's, land size and whatever, and much less so about the experience of the person who's going to be living in it, existing in it, working in it, whatever the kind of property it is. And it would be just so great if we could quantify all of that stuff somehow so that it also became a metric by which to succeed. But for the moment, let's just go with, if you're adding value to people's lives and they're happy, then, as you say, they're more likely to stay, more likely to respect and take care of your investment. It's got to be good financially as well.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Investor Lab, the auditory epicenter for passionate property investors seeking a life of freedom, choice and abundance. And I am super excited for today's guest. But before I get to who that is, I want to talk about something. The whole reason we want to invest in property is to create a better life for ourselves. And what is that? When we think about wealth creation, what we actually should be thinking about is not just the financial side, but things like well-being, happiness, fulfillment, all of these other factors that make a good life. Which is why I'm really, really excited to have this guest on today, because she specializes in helping you to design spaces that create an optimal life existence. It's kind of how I frame it. I'd love to, we want to dig into that a bit more. But Amy Loughman, I'm really excited to have you on the show. Welcome. How are you?
Thanks so much, Goose. I'm doing well, thanks.
So I'm super excited to have you on the show because you recently did a what we call a Feed Your Mind session. And for those of you listening at home, we actually do something with our team. We're a 100% remote business, and we do things periodically once a month where we invite special guests into the business to present to our team, to help them become a better version of themselves on all facets of life. And the feedback that we got from our team on the specific one that you did, Dr. Amy, was immense. People said it was, to put it bluntly, they basically said it was life-changing. There was a lot of stuff that people really took away and implemented in their life. But I really want to get into, what is it that you do? Because it's such a specialized area of psychology that I really want to get into it. So want to give us the kind of background. What is it that you actually do?
Yeah, so it's all about helping people create workspaces or work practices that enhance their focus, their creativity, their productivity, and their overall well-being. I've spent the last decade or so in scientific research and as an educator in universities, looking at how science can inform our lives. So that's kind of the angle I come at everything with. So I've looked at designing spaces for well-being, but also habits, diets, lifestyles, work practices, the whole thing. And I've become really frustrated with how slowly science is actually translated into real life. So that's what I'm aiming to do with Thoughtful Spaces, is to kind of bring the gems from neuroscience, environmental psychology, design principles to people's lives so that they can apply them, pick up whatever resonates the most, and make small but meaningful changes to how they do, mostly working remotely, but it applies more broadly to life too.
So why did you focus, because what you mentioned there is really, really fascinating. And I love talking to scientists because, you obviously go really, really deep on these areas and deeply trying to understand. I try and do that too, but obviously I'm not a doctor. You're a doctor. So, you've definitely gone a lot further on that path than I have. And you mentioned there that a lot of your thinking has been around, broadly speaking, it's around well-being. And as you mentioned, all kinds of different stuff, habits, everything like that. Why have you focused on spaces? Why have you narrowed your focus onto the environments and the spaces that people are in? Why has that become the key lever?
Yeah, so I have always been fascinated in the kind of forgotten aspects of well-being. We all know the basics, sleep lots. Now we sort of talk about eating well, staying positive. There are kind of these dominant narratives about well-being. The last research topic I was really deeply in for almost a decade was about the gut microbiome. And the reason that really pulled me in is because prior to that, the last decade really, psychologists, psychiatrists, people talking about mental health never considered the gut, but actually it's hugely important. And similarly, the physical environment, it's almost like an afterthought. We think we are people, it's more important what happens inside us or in our brains, but there's all this other environmental stuff that we're not always conscious of it mattering and making a difference, but it does. And there's actually all this science as well that just doesn't get talked about as much and doesn't get applied. It's such low-hanging fruit, so low risk, such a huge opportunity for people to leverage this information for improving well-being. And that's why I've really honed in on it.
It's really fascinating because my personal passion is not actually real estate, right? Believe it or not. My personal passion is my personal passion is like, how do I help people to live their best life? That's the fundamental thing. And so the whole reason that we started Dashdot is because we could see that a lot of people were like wealth in the context of like the whole picture of creating a good life. Wealth is a portion of it, and we recognize an opportunity that we could help people on that side of things. But then, I'm the first person to say that like property is not going to make you happy, right? It's like it's a pathway to get you to a place where you can live a better life, and then you've got to start thinking like, well, what else creates a better life? Things like, to your point, it's things like health, both mental and physical. It's the places we are. And if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first layer is physiological needs, which is things like shelter, right? So the very first instance, shelter is one of the very first things that we need to start to feel okay. But what's really interesting is that beyond just the need, the physiological need for shelter, the spaces that we are in and the environments that we are in actually transcend through 4 of the 5 stages of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So physiological needs, okay, have I got like a roof to protect me from rain and sun? Safety needs, okay, am I in a space where I feel safe, where I can actually feel happy and calm and secure? Love and belonging, what actually happens in those spaces? Are you bringing your family around you? Have you got a place where you can be with family and friends? Can you actually create that space?
Yeah, what can
Even
you do
to
then?
the esteem level. Yeah, exactly. And to the esteem level, it's like, is this place a representative of how I feel about myself and everything like that? And so you've really got this really interesting transcendence. And I think, when we talk about work, home, whatever, particularly in the context of this conversation, being Dashdot being 100% remote, and the conversation we've been having around designing your workspaces at home to better have that kind of overall. But if you just think about the macro of the spaces that we're in, how much that shapes our worldview is really, really critically important.
And our experience of the world.
So
yeah,
exactly. So how can, like, I want to dig into that a little bit further. So can we start to try and expand on this idea of how specifically the spaces that we're in or the environments that we're in, how does that actually impact our worldview? Because a lot of people might be thinking, well, I'm in a room, but like, what's the difference between good and bad, or how can we start to develop that narrative?
Yeah, well, worldview I see as the way our perspective on the world. I'd probably frame it a little bit differently to that. I'd probably frame it more in terms of how your body is physiologically, and therefore the foundation on which your mind and brain operates. I think perspective and worldview for me is just a little bit further from that. So I don't know if I can draw as long a bow as to say it'll change your perspective.
Totally fine.
But if we talk about kind of sensory perception, how well your body is, and then how your mind and brain can act and be in response to that, then there are 1,000,001 ways that the physical environment affects that. And it's really interesting you mentioning the levels of the hierarchy of needs, because I hadn't really seen it from that lens. But I think, for self-actualization, we do need autonomy and choice, which you're all about at Dashdot. And that extends to how much control you have over your environment, which is a huge factor in terms of its well-being. So this is where I think the science of it can add to design, because I'm not an architect, I'm not an interior designer. They have their own perspectives on that. And there's certainly like design principles and beauty and all that sort of thing. But the choice that, we don't all agree on what's beautiful and great, because how meaningful it is to us personally, how the choices we've made in what it looks like and how it functions is integral to how well it suits our individual needs. There's a huge degree of personalization in this as well. But if we talk about the ways that it impacts our well-being, so many of them we're not even conscious of. For example, there's all this research coming out about blue space, being able to see or interact with sort of oceans and bodies of water, and showing that even looking at an ocean reduces our heart rate. Now, I feel great when I go to the ocean, but I've never sort of consciously clocked that my heart is beating more slowly. And of course, in the long term, we want that, overall for a lower heart rate is better. We know that noise pollution in the form of like overhead plane noise interrupts kids' learning, because they've got to filter out that drone noise versus the information they're learning. And over time, that makes them less able to remember and learn new information. We know that cluttered spaces can increase how stressed people are in terms of their cortisol levels. So these are just a few examples of these relatively small effects, but combined, it's, quite profound, I think, if we actually thought about all of those elements and more.
Yeah, and I actually want to push back on your point of view on how it affects the worldview. Now, worldview in the way that I think about it is like how you perceive the world. And I think everything you pointed to, I want to reinforce my view that I think that this actually does impact massively your worldview, because everything you've just said there, like if you can feel calmer because you can see blue, right? What does that do? That's necessarily going to lower your cortisol levels, which, the jets overhead. And all of these things chemically, biologically, are going to change how you're responding to the inputs that you're having, right? And so if you're in a high state of stress and anxiety and somebody says something to you, you might be like, oh my God, this person's,
I think that is so
whatever.
fair.
You're
it will change your perceptions. Yeah, I get that. I'd agree with that.
Yeah, it'll change your perceptions. And your perception is your reality. And so if you can exist in a space where you feel calm, centered, emotionally controlled, soothed, then necessarily the problems or challenges that come along in life will become small and relatively insignificant. If you're in a place where you feel highly stressed, highly anxious, all of that kind of stuff, even small things will become very big things. And those both compound. You either have like a negative feedback loop or a positive feedback loop. And so I think, and this is kind of just generally how I think about like optimizing a life generally, right? Because I don't think there is a right or a wrong. To your point, it's like, well, some people might want to be by the ocean and some people might want to be in a forest, right? And that's okay. There is no...
Or in the city.
Like what is good is relatively... Yeah, or in the city. Yeah. What is good is relatively subjective. But the point being is if you can identify the characteristics that create an environment where you feel happy, fulfilled, enriched on a day-to-day basis, you're far more likely to be successful. And when I say successful, I don't just mean financially. I mean in all ways, in your relationships, in your intellectual pursuits, in your all of these kind of things, because you're going to be operating from a better place. And so I think, and if we think about work is the one place we spend the most amount of time.
It's another reason why I honed in on it.
But then also if you work, it's so important.
Exactly.
And this is where there's great synergy between what you do and certainly my view of work and business, right? And so when we started building Dashdot, I'm lucky enough to have never had a real job, right? So I don't know what happens in these corporate offices and, all of this kind of stuff. But we set out to go, okay, well, if we have to have a real job, Gabby and I, we'd want to try and create a workplace where the kind of place that we'd want to go to work. So what would that have to be like? And how would we have to think about that? Because you spend the majority of your waking hours at work. So how could you make something that is fulfilling and enriching and the kind of place that you're excited to be, rather than a place that you go to and then escape from?
Absolutely. I think there's a real opportunity for it to become something that contributes to well-being rather than what detracts from well-being, which so many people's work situations are things that detract or that cause burnout, that deplete them rather than something which nourishes them. And the space is one way where you can kind of feed yourself back by taking care of that space that you work in.
Yeah, 100%. Can you talk to me about neuroarchitecture? It's an interesting word. What do you mean by neuroarchitecture? And then how can people think about this application?
So it's essentially the conglomeration of the fields of neuroscience and architecture and an appreciation of the fact that they intersect. That it's not just... Buildings are not benign, they affect us. And increasingly, both neuroscience is recognizing the impact of the built environment on brains, and architecture is also beginning to understand that their decisions and their structures and the worlds that are built around us or that we, live in, impact our brains as well. And so there's a whole field called neuroarchitecture. I went to a conference just earlier this year on it. And there's a lot of, VR experiments looking at how brainwaves change when you walk through different spaces and things like that. And gradually, it's a fairly new field, but it's starting to build up an understanding of the architectural effects on people's brains, essentially.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's fascinating because where my mind is going, and I hope you don't mind that this is a bit of a free range conversation, because I think it's just a fascinating kind of topic to wander through. where my mind is going is actually around the intersection of doing good things and capitalism, right? Which is interesting because, on the kind of like financial pursuit side. Yeah. And I think that there's different degrees of that. There's social entrepreneurship, which is like, fully deeply embedded in, social justice causes. But there's also how can I create a situation where both people on both sides of the economic transaction are enriched by the experience, and in doing so, does that actually make the transaction better? And so my thinking around this was actually thinking about property investors, which is obviously most of the people listening to the show are going to be property investors. And we won't necessarily delve into what I want to focus on is the design of spaces for tenants is a really interesting concept. Because you get a lot of kind of landlords, or there's certainly a perception of landlords, and I think there are a portion of landlords out there, property investors, who they want to spend the least amount of money. They don't want to fix anything. They're just like, and it's very sort of like us versus them. My personal point of view, and certainly something that we've been big advocates of just generally, is, when you're a property investor, you're in business. The product that you're providing or the service you're providing is accommodation solutions. Every one of your tenants, they're one of your clients, and so happy clients is really good for business. And so you're highly incentivized to make the experience good and supportive for the tenants. Now, I'm also a renter, so I also am on the other side of it. I'm like, I want a good experience. So then thinking that through, how could property investors think about neuroarchitecture as it relates to their investment properties? Because if they can create a space that feels better, is better, keeps people for longer, the tenants are happier, that is a good thing to do for the other people. Bingo. It's going to be good for the people. That will translate, at least at some stage, into economic benefits as well. How would you think about that, or how would you kind of expand on that thread?
Yeah, I really love that. I think it humanizes a financial topic, and I hope that view becomes more of a dominant view, because we often think about property in terms of its growth and its yield and its financial metrics, right? And then it's, land size and whatever, and much less so about the experience of the person who's going to be living in it, existing in it, working in it, whatever the kind of property it is. And it would be just so great if we could quantify all of that stuff somehow so that it also became a metric by which to succeed. But for the moment, let's just go with, if you're adding value to people's lives and they're happy, then, as you say, they're more likely to stay, more likely to respect and take care of your investment. It's got to be good financially as well. But if we flick back to the human side, having established that it's definitely good for business, there are definitely features of a property that you can enhance or think about that are going to impact the well-being of the occupants. And there are some that are just inherent in a property, right? Like the aspect, the way it faces, the way the sunlight comes in, whether it's got natural light, how much, whether the building materials are made to last, whether they're renewable, whether the occupants can access nature from within the building, whether it's indirectly through looking at it or hearing it or something, or easily get there. So I guess that kind of location, to a park, ocean or a river or something, they are. All of those things are really important, but I acknowledge that they're also fixed aspects of a property that an owner can't necessarily readily change. So let's presume that, you've bought somewhere, you're not exactly going to flip it on its axis to make sure it's north facing or lift it to somewhere else. There are also things that you can do, I think, to modify it to make sure it fits well-being better. And one of those things is something I mentioned earlier about autonomy. People really connect with a place a lot better and have better well-being if they have some control over their space. And I think that's really something that motivates people towards home ownership, is from a sort of frustration or perceived frustration that they won't be able to really feel that they have control over decisions they make, or, the aspects of where they live. But if you can provide that to occupants of a rented place, then you're giving them a lot of the benefits that people see as being requiring home ownership to have. So I think one of them is just to provide autonomy wherever you can. Often that doesn't cost anything. It's just sort of relinquishing a bit of control. And then they'll be sort of taking up suggestions that will the people that live there will know the things that will make them more comfortable usually. And if they have the guts to ask, I think it's worth really considering. So, a fly door to stop the pests coming in so they can get a breeze. A breeze and natural airflow is super important. It sounds really obvious, kind of overlooked in lots of buildings, particularly new build apartments, just often don't have through breeze. Also not that easy to retrofit, but if you're in a position to, kind of a no-brainer. Awnings to offset afternoon heat. There's obviously glare and heat problems that make places pretty uncomfortable. Even the option to paint a wall a different colour costs you nothing to sort of accept that proposal. Generally will add value if they're, making decent choices, and allows that person to feel like they kind of are part of the space and it's part of who they are and they can express their identity and stuff. So, I think there are a few ideas there.
That's really fascinating. I want to tease out some of that as well. You at the start of that soliloquy, you were talking about how creating spaces with your property portfolio, the people inside the portfolio matter. But it's the same thing as like when you're investing in shares, right? So when you're investing in shares, you're investing in a business. And then within those businesses are a whole bunch of human beings. And people can relate to that, right? And so then if you think about like, would I want to invest in businesses where the culture was great and where the people in, culture matters so much in business. It's such a driver of value. You naturally can then start to then think about how does that then translate to your property portfolio? Like imagine if you had a property portfolio and you had tenants who would be excited to live there for the next 5 or 10 years and also felt gratitude to be there, right? Rather than sort of adversarial relationship. Because I've been in rental properties, particularly when I was in my 20s, where it was a bit like, the landlord does nothing for us, we're not doing anything. It felt adversarial, right? But
you're not going to give anything back if you don't feel like that someone's being generous towards you.
Oh yeah, totally.
Mm.
But could you create an environment where it didn't feel adversarial, where it felt collaborative, where you were invested in their well-being, and they would also in turn invest in the well-being of you and subsequently your assets? Tony Robbins talks about the 6 human needs, and I won't go through all of them, but 2 that popped out as you were kind of like talking about was certainty and uncertainty. All human beings want certainty, right? But they also want variety. And so if you could feasibly create because like one of the biggest concerns of renters, and one of the reasons that they feel like they might need to go and buy a home, which I actually, for 90% of people, I don't think buying a home is actually like a smart move personally. But one of the reasons they want to do that is because they want that autonomy, like you said. They want to feel like they can just, do it on their own. Certainty, yeah, certainty. They don't want to feel like they're going to get kicked out next year, or what if suddenly the landlord just raises the rent, or there's this uncertainty, and because of that uncertainty, people don't feel like they want to sink some roots in. I've been in that situation as well, where it's like we're here, but like the last place that Gabby and I rented. Before this place, we were like, we thought of all these things we wanted to do to invest in the place to make it better, but we were like, well, I don't know, like, I'm not sure if we should do that because we might not be here in 12 months. And so we didn't. And so we actually had a suboptimal living experience, partly because we weren't prepared to invest in things that we would be happy to pay for, that we didn't expect the landlord to pay for. But we didn't do it, and subsequently had a suboptimal experience. And so I wonder if this... because like the concept, like on a micro, is like, how do you set up your spaces to make you feel better? Cool. But then on a macro is, how do you think about environment considerations in a way that creates overall well-being? And I'm wondering, just thinking out loud, like imagine if you had a scenario where, your tenants were, you could set up a longer term agreement where it's like 12 months renewable, and you had, hey, by the way, here's what we're going to do. Every year, the rent's going to go up by 5%. Then it's known, certainty. We want you to stay long-term. Ideally, you'd be living here for the next 5 or 10 years. We want to incentivize that. And also, these are all the things you can do to make your place a home. If you want to paint a wall, not a problem. You've got to let us know or whatever. And when you move out, if we request it, you've got to paint it back to the original color or, whatever. And you could set this
think
up to
there would
say,
be reasonable ways
treat
to
this
do
like
that.
your home.
Yeah. Why the system?
Yeah.
I mean, you're in this business, not me. The system should be better geared to do that. And in Europe, I think they do have much longer tenancies, and then tenants start to get better rights the longer they're there. I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I think there are models where this is done better than we do it in Australia.
Yeah, it's super interesting. What I'm curious about, aside from like what I'm interested in is gearing the conversation a little bit towards the kind of work from home setup, right? Because a lot of people are working from home, and in fact, it's one of the most interesting things that's happened to the property landscape, right? Realistically, because people's ability to work from anywhere has changed the dynamics of where people live, right? And access to internet, Starlink, and all that kind of stuff.
Home has to be a whole lot more than just home, just a place to exist between workdays.
Yeah, totally. So there's three drivers behind any sort of like location from a property investment perspective to define a good location. Three characteristics. Number one is jobs, so economic opportunity. Number two is lifestyle. So is it in an environment macro that they want to be in, whether they prefer to be in farming areas or coastal or whatever, but is it is the lifestyle opportunity there? And then relative affordability. So can people afford to live there? But then outside of that, it's also things like the economic opportunity bit is really interesting, because if people can work in Sydney or Melbourne on the internet, but live in, like Tamworth, then that creates an interesting opportunity. But what that does is that then pushes the work and home existence together. And that can actually be really challenging as someone who's been working from home for a really long time. Sometimes having the definition between the spaces can be really challenging. So I'm interested to get some context around how a lot of more people are in the kind of work from home scenario. How can people think about optimizing their work from home experience to optimize their current well-being?
So this is at the heart of Thoughtful Spaces. I do entire workshop consultancy on this. This is basically why I created it to answer this very question. So you'll appreciate there's not a quick answer. There are lots and lots of domains.
That's good. We've got time.
I'll do my best. The crux of it is, as I said before, I think there's a real opportunity to leverage remote work. We can actually enhance our well-being with that new flexibility that more and more people have post-COVID. I think we're on the same page about that. And to me, the crux of it is really also that any work that's more than going through the motions, so anything that's effortful or engaged or creative or meaningful in some way, really deserves a context. You matter enough, each person matters enough to set themselves up with the best context to enable whatever work they're doing. And in general, for knowledge work, which is kind of where I'm firstly have experience and where I'm setting a niche because I know it really well, that requires really good focus, which is something that we're rapidly losing as a society. There are so many reasons for that. I won't go into all of them, but it's acknowledged that we have less of an ability to focus into single task than we used to, and that it's a struggle because we still need to be able to. There's just this perception that we need to be able to do everything at once. So anyway, focus is critical. Obviously, you want to be creative when, you need to be creative. You need productivity in general. And you want to do that with a relative sense of ease. And that's, I think, providing a context for all those things, acknowledging that those states of mind and being require a context is kind of the foundation. Because I think often we just go, we can work from home or we can work from wherever. All I need is my computer. And that's not really true. That's just the physical machine that you need to set yourself up. And an internet connection, obviously. That's the bare minimum. Really, ideally, you want a lot more in that context to allow it. So yeah, I think we can work from anywhere. It doesn't have to be a bricks and mortar home office perfectly set up, but consider all of the factors that make up the context. So if it's the dining room table, can you clear your space, what you can see from it, so that it's a less distracting place to be, so that it doesn't have breakfast on it, for example, just at a minimum, make sure that the context is kind of for work, even if it's not a work, a home office. So clearing of distractions, ensure you're really comfortable. I think also we just go, all I need is a desk, and then we think about ergonomy, right? Like the right size chair and desk. That's kind of, if we get there, we think about that. But what about temperature? Research shows that when people are too hot, they get angry. is angry the best way to sort of set yourself up for focus? Like you were saying, when you're highly aroused, you're not going to be making good decisions and all the rest of it. We need light. There's so much to say about light. Sound pollution. We want silence either, so there's kind of a balancing act here. Nature sounds are really calming, something to consider. You can just put them in, through a recording if you don't have birds tweeting outside your window. Like you said before, we need a sense of safety. And that's not just that we're not going to get, mugged at work, which is probably not a concern for most people, but that we, more subtly, that we won't be interrupted, or that we have privacy when we need it and things like that. So working from anywhere might, a cafe isn't always the ideal place for that, not just because of the noise, but because you don't have that sense of privacy and stuff. So there's just a whole lot of aspects of developing context that I think could be done a lot more intentionally by many people. And that's kind of why I created Thoughtful Space.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was thinking through, the real world, like how do I apply a lot of that stuff? What's interesting as well is like different types, and I'd love to get your take on this. So maybe I'll try and phrase it as a question rather than a statement. But do you think that different types of work, we're specifically talking about knowledge work. It's very hard to work from home if you need to go build somebody else's house, right? For example, right? But different types of work would benefit from different types of environmental settings. And some context for that, for example, is like, I know that Gabby, for certain types of work, prefers to go and work from a cafe because there's something about, for her, there's something about having the movement and the sounds and the stuff that stimulates a level of creativity for her, where she goes into this kind of deep work zone on a very specific type of work. Whereas for me, I'm like, if I have all those sounds, I'm just like this. I can't. I'm like, get me out of here, right? But I'm wondering if like because it's very hard to say. Like, so perhaps sitting on the couch for some type of work might be good, right? So is there a relationship between the spaces and the work, and then
absolutely. As per your lived experience, and I think many people's, that is absolutely the case. The how and when the work is done is just as important as where it's done. It's kind of the combination of all of those things. So I'd add to the what kind of work and where to when, because we have a circadian rhythm throughout the day that's going to affect us all slightly differently, but there are sort of broad, consistencies. We tend to be better focused in the morning, not first thing, but a little bit after that. There are different times of week where we'll have different kind of levels of energy. So there's that as well to consider. But the types of work, for sure, even within knowledge work, we all have different modes that we work in. Some of it's kind of deep, really focused solo work, and it's more collaborative, or it's creative work, or it's kind of a whole bunch of shallow administrative tasks. Or the worst possible thing is I'm trying to do it all at once. My day or my afternoon has the to-do list has a bunch of all of them. So yeah, absolutely. And then there are these fascinating kind of little gems of findings in studies that point to little hints at how we can optimize the space for the type of work. So I'll just give you a minor example. There's this thing called the cathedral effect, where taller ceilings prompt expansive and creative thought. It's not something I would have really picked up on, but now I think about it, it feels lovely to, like, there are a couple of cafes near us that have really big ceilings. And I just love the feeling of going in there, and I feel like I have bigger ideas when I go in. This same study looked at people's ability to do like kind of detail-oriented analytic work, and find that actually they do it more accurately in a lower ceilinged place. So, there is a context for everything. And like, I haven't seen a study on couches, but sure, like, absolutely, it's about setting up, and as you say, everyone has different preferences as well. So for you, what is the best how, when, and where to do the kinds of work that you need to do? And can you optimize your working life for that, given the autonomy and the flexibility that your work life allows you? That's essentially what I want to support people to do.
Yeah, it's funny you say that as well about the cathedral effect. That's really interesting. And it made me think of something I learned from Dr. John DeMartini a long time ago. He said something about if you can, try and live somewhere where you can see the horizon. Because if you can see the horizon, typically what he was kind of referring to was like the horizon over the ocean, but basically like long distance views, that actually creates the space for your brain to expand. Like you'll have more expansive, creative thoughts because your perception is different. So I think it might be something similar for as you were saying it, I was like thinking about the like high voltage ceilings, and I was like, yeah, you know what, it does really change the emotional context of the space. It sounds to me though like a lot of this is also stitched to habits. Now you mentioned like your pathway to get to the company that you now have, which is called Thoughtful Spaces, which specializes in helping people to optimize their environment, to optimize their well-being. But the pathway to get here to Thoughtful Spaces was habits, health, all of these other things. And I can't help but think they're all related. Like they're all specifically related because like if you set up a perfectly ergonomic desk, but then you don't have the habits and rituals to support how that fits within the context, that could easily be non-productive.
Yeah. I think
so I'd be interested.
Yeah, I think that's why this is a dynamic thing that as a psychologist, I bring something to it. And I think that's where it's a partnership with design, because design can feel like a static thing, like designing a building or a space or a perfectly ergonomic desk, like you said. But it's absolutely the how you use that perfect setup or several perfect setups that really matters and determines how much you're going to get out of it.
Do you provide any guidance on that when you work with companies or individuals? Because, you know, back to the point, like the neuroarchitecture is like, okay, I'm going to say something where you might want to shoot me, but it's almost like thinking about it in that kind of like, well, no, I'm not going to mention feng shui. We'll stay away from that. But like at the positioning of the like how you set up the space, okay, that's great. But then it's like, here's how you need to interact with it. So is that something you explore? Because I'm also thinking of the defining work and non-work. And if you're lucky enough to have a place where you've got a home office and you can close the door, that's still a habit where it's like, go in there and work, close the door and leave, right? And then that defines your context, but maybe you don't have maybe you have to work in the space that you live in and all that kind of stuff. So how do you teach, advise, or consult with people on the relationship between habits and space?
Yeah, so it's more possible in small group workshops or one-on-one that I do after the sort of feed your mind type session that you mentioned earlier. So that sort of provides the foundations and prompts people to think about these kinds of issues. And then I've developed a bunch of tools that actually ask them to reflect on their space and their practices specifically so that they can identify where they do creative work, for example, what their current sort of tension points are in their workday. And then we nut through together to work out a plan and to sort of test different ways, because there isn't either one perfect way to do things, and it'll probably change over time for people and as their habits change. And you mentioned the closing the door thing. It's absolutely a habit, but you'll agree that's a pretty easy habit to do in terms of ending a work day and starting life or a non-work aspect of the day, compared to someone that is, you know, on their couch for part of it or in their, you know, toddler's bedroom or something while they're working. It still requires habits, but it's got to be something a bit more deliberate because of that. You can't just sort of close it off and then be visually done with it. It's going to be more about, you know, setting a set of items that you physically put away so that you have this tangible sense that is closed and done now. So that you can form that space and transform that space back into whatever its standard, you know, or non-work use is.
I love that. So I'm going to probably put you on the spot a little bit here, but if somebody's listening to this and they wanted to self-audit their kind of current environment to work out, okay, is this good or not? Like, have you got some questions or suggestions or prompts that someone listening to this could, because I think if someone's listening to this and they've gotten this far into it, they're obviously interested in how to apply this. They're going, okay, this is really cool. I want to feel better. I want to live a better life. What are some prompts that they could go away and just think about or do, or can you give some kind of guidance on how they could start to self-assess their current set of circumstances and then perhaps what they can do about it?
So there are lots of domains, like I mentioned, and it's kind of a process that probably takes 20 minutes that I've broken down, and it's not something that is easily shared verbally. But a simple example is to look around your space and identify anything that's visible to you or you sort of within arm or, a few steps reach that isn't required for work in the space that you call your workspace. And as we talked about, that's going to be difficult it's going to be a different answer for people who are working in their kid's bedroom versus in a home office. But even in a home office, I guarantee you, if you look around, you'll find things that shouldn't be there. And we know about clutter and its physiological effect. That is like such a low-hanging fruit thing that feels too superficial to even worry about. Like, oh, how would tidying up help me work? Well, everything that you don't need for your work that's not contributing some other value, like reminding you why you work, say pictures of your kids or something that sort of adds, like is a values-based thing, can detract from your attention. So it's, the washing up that you haven't done or the dishes from lunch that's sitting on your desk still because you haven't put them away is like, come on, you slob, like put away your dishes. The life admin, the letters you haven't opened is telling you that you've got to do that. And it's all sort of adding, it's like a visual to-do list if you've got stuff there that's not directly what you need to do. So that's just kind of one example. Another one is looking at where you get your light source from and whether there's glare at different types of times of day. Can you reorient so you don't? Because that's a huge stressor for the visual system. Using light diffusing blinds is one suggestion I have. I've got some here. They're really like low cost. You can just buy the fabric and like put them on a instant like curtain hanger to stop glare, but still get plenty of natural light. Natural light is, just completely required for sleep, energy, focus, all of that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of self-assessment things like that come with recommendations because they will lead to, pretty obvious fixes.
Yeah, nice. It almost sounds like what we're really trying to do is optimize for flow. Like, it's like, okay, how can
flow
you put yourself
in a part? Yeah.
Do you want to talk about flow then? Do you want to talk about how that? I'd love to get your take on that. And then, because when you were saying, decluttering and all of that kind of stuff, the way that I was thinking about that was when you have all these kind of things around you, whether it be the lunch bowl sitting on your thing, that it gives you an opportunity to be including, if you get notifications on your phone or whatever, all of these things, they distract. I have no notifications on anything. If anything ever pings in my life or bings in my life, I'm like, what the hell is this? But like, if you can strip away all of the distraction, all you are left with is focus. And then when you get into those kind of states, you kind of get into flow. So is it kind of like, it might be oversimplifying it or misunderstanding, but are we effectively optimizing for flow? And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a really big part of it because more often in deep knowledge work than we would like to admit, flow is critical. We don't allow ourselves to get there a lot, which I think is what causes frustration in people's work days because they feel like they're multitasking. They never sort of make meaningful progress through one thing, constantly interrupted with Slack messages and emails and an expectation of synchronous communication. And all of that, like you said, completely disrupts flow. And over time, that sense of not being able to get through your important to-dos on your work to-do list creates burnout because there's a sense of like lack of control about it, and a sense that you can never get into what is a deeply satisfying state. It's not just good because we're productive. It's a state that we as humans really thrive in and seek. We've all had a taste of it, but it's pretty hard to get back into it. And you mentioned oversimplifying. So I think the environmental stuff like turning off your phone, making sure you don't have distractions, that's a really good start. It's not going to be the instant answer for everybody because we live in a world that is so distracted all the time. So it's really important to acknowledge as well that firstly, there are individual differences in how easily people can slip into a state of focus, and also that it takes time to build that practice. It is a practice, and it's like a muscle that will grow and strengthen with use. So you can strip away everything, but then feel incredibly frustrated that you still can't focus, or it's very uncomfortable to be in that state if you haven't been in there before. So I just want to acknowledge that it's not a silver bullet. Sort of clearing your desk and turning off your notifications is not going to be the only thing, but it's a really, really good start.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like sometimes, like if you strip away all the distractions, you're not used to it, it can feel really
because your thoughts come to your mind, and the thoughts are scary because they're not always nice.
Yeah, you typically need to do a bit of a dopamine detox when that kind of a thing happens as well, because you're not used to not having the stimulus Yeah, it's fascinating. Fascinating when you're forced to confront your thoughts. I want to think about this again from a practical perspective, because you help companies to optimize for their team, but you also help individuals. And I'm sort of thinking about this from a lifestyle design perspective, right? Everyone is highly incentivized to create the best possible life they can. And on an individual level, like if you had the capability to, improve not only the efficiency with which you do your work, not so you can get more done, but so you can buy back more time, or the satisfaction with which you did the work that you did, so that you didn't finish the workday feeling exhausted and burnt out and, all of this kind of stuff, then necessarily, like, that sounds like something that's really, really worth investing in. I heard a story, just as a little slight segue. I heard a story recently about a guy, he was running a pretty successful company, and he had one salesperson who outperformed all of the other salespeople by 400%. And like 400%, that's massive, 4 times more.
Or is this like a fable?
It's a true story.
Okay.
No, it's a true story. No, the guy's Dan Martell. Anyone could look him up. I'm pretty sure it's 400%. It's a real story. And he said, he went to the sales guy and he said, what the hell? Like, what's going on? Like, why are you so more successful than everyone else? And he said, well, I kind of worked out the only thing I needed to do was be on sales calls. So I hired my own assistant so that I could just focus on doing the things that I could do best. And I got them to take care of all the other stuff. The moral of that is that person took the initiative to invest in themselves, and net created such a massively asymmetrical outcome. Now, in that context, it's financial, but again, as we've mentioned several times, finance is just one part of what success looks like.
And he allowed himself to single task as well by doing that.
Love that.
So yes,
he invested,
specifically he invested in his ability to do the thing he did best and to not be distracted by the other crap.
Love that. Yeah. Great observation. Yeah, correct. Because like multitasking is not a thing, and switching costs is a thing. So the higher the variety of tasks, the lower the efficacy of the things you need to do. Or the things that you're going to do. So what I found interesting about that was
just one more thing. Sorry. Go ahead. Finish the story.
You go. No, you go. You go.
All right, I'll go. I think it's really hard to muscle your way through single tasking and forcing focus and that sort of thing. And that's where making it a bit easier by letting the environment support you is key. Putting structures around yourself so it's not just willpower, because willpower is finite and it's very effortful. But if we, as you say, invest in the time or in whatever it is to set yourself up well, then you're giving yourself a fighting chance to get into flow more often, to focus better, to get through things, be more efficient.
100% agree. And there's loads of studies, and you actually probably have way more knowledge on this than I do, but there's loads of studies that I've seen that talk about, in any given work day, how much effective work is actually being done. And I've seen anything from several minutes. Yeah, I've seen anything from several minutes to maybe a couple of hours. And which is fascinating because, like, realistically, no one wants to waste their time. Like, nobody wants to just be working for work's sake. So if you can improve your ability to be more effective, then what you're effectively doing is creating either increased outcome or decreased time or effort, or one of those two.
We live in a very presenteeism world, though, Goose. It's pretty hard to get to, well, just be effective and then the time is your own, because most people are under a kind of presenteeism model where they've got to be, even if they've done their work, their sort of core work, they've got to be there on Slack and on email and all this sort of stuff. Like, there's a whole culture shift that needs to go with this as well, so that efficiency isn't penalized by requiring you then to sit there and, do the admin.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I'm really passionately anti that, but also that's one of the things I want to advocate for. If anyone hasn't read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, I highly recommend you read it, because he actually discusses in that book how to tackle if you're in one of those kind of working environments where they'll need you to punch the clock to show that you've been working, even if you do 2 hours of work, you need to punch in and punch out after 8 hours. It's totally,
it's a very old metaphor,
way to work. Yeah, but it's true. Like, our hours don't equal outcomes, and
no. In fact, they're almost inversed.
And I think exactly right. And so, even starting to plant the seed at an individual level that is not true actually helps to then change the status quo. Because if more individuals want to rail against that, then they don't want to be in work environments where that becomes the norm. or that is the norm and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think that change happens slowly first and then all at once. And so
and at
these
every
kind
level,
of things, shifting the perspective is important. Yeah,
totally. I think individuals can drive this because after all, organizations are made up of individuals. So the culture change and practices have to change at every level.
Bingo. And that's something we've done at Dashdot. So we don't track anyone's hours. We never have tracked anyone's hours.
That's
ever.
great.
And we never will.
Your outcomes have been great, haven't they?
They've been fantastic.
Yeah. Sorry to understate it.
We measure the outcomes in a variety of different ways. There's like financial metrics and whatever, but the things that we really measure are things like, our team engagement. Like how engaged are people in the business and are they happy and fulfilled? Because we have a very low, the technical term is turnover rate, but like, team members leaving, it is insanely low. Why? Because we've optimized for a place where people can have a degree of flexibility. We operate on a ethos of freedom and responsibility. And there's some constraints around that because you've got to make sure everything can functionally, organize effectively. But giving people that degree of autonomy, which we talked about earlier, is super important. But if someone's listening to this, you do individual workshops, do you not? Is that something you offer for people?
I have provided them before. I don't have a clear kind of schedule as to when I do them, but on my website, there's an expression of interest thing. And basically when I have enough people, I run them. So if the organisation isn't going to provide it, then yes, I do support individuals as well. And I've done one-on-one work as well, which is deeply satisfying for me and the person involved usually. So I like doing that too. Someone needs a deeper dive. Yeah,
and that's kind of why I wanted to set up that that I guess token of personal responsibility, because you don't have to wait. Like if you're in a situation where you're like, all right, I'm unhappy with my current set of circumstances. I don't feel fulfilled. I think my workspace could be better. I want more satisfaction in how I do my work. Outsourcing the responsibility to the organization and saying, hey, please, will you come and fix my problem? I mean, that's one way of doing it. But you're reliant on an organization being evolved enough to really see the value in that. We've known from the get-go that the value in the company comes from the team, but most companies don't think that way. So then if you take the personal responsibility back and say, okay, well, how could I change this for myself? That's why I wanted to bring that in, because you are the master and commander of your own experience, your own perception and your own destiny, your own reality. So then why not take charge of that?
Yeah, and even if you're working for the man or you don't have a natural autonomy as you like or in a work situation you love, optimizing the way you work will make you enjoy that more and make you more empowered to be able to find the thing that works better for you. So it's sort of very self-defeating to hate the situation and then to go, oh, well, because that's for someone else's profits, why would I bother trying to be more efficient or more productive? Well, you'll feel a lot better when you're working at your best. You'll have more sort of self-respect and you'll be producing results that are better externally as well, and then have more leverage to go somewhere else if that's the goal.
Love that. That's perfect. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's a conversation, obviously, it's that doesn't really get had very often, but again, and with, not to labor the point, but all we have is the experience of the environment that we're in, realistically. Like it changes so much about, as I mentioned earlier, about how we view the world. So I think it's a critical conversation to have when we think about things like happiness, well-being, satisfaction, all of that kind of stuff. So it's been a really, really interesting and fulfilling conversation for me to have. So thank you.
I've enjoyed it too. Thanks, Goose.
Oh, that's good. I'm delighted. And if you're interested in learning more about this, and I highly recommend you head to thoughtfulspaces.com.au. That's Dr. Amy's website, where you can go and learn more and, again, potentially inquire about small group stuff or workshops, things like that. I think this is something that everyone can really kind of take home and action. Is there anything else you wanted to add or tease out before we wrap things up?
No, I think you've done a great job there, Goose, and it's been a fun convo. Thanks for it.
My absolute pleasure. Well, thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it. And of course, if you're listening to this and you have enjoyed it, make sure that you think of someone who you think will benefit from this information, because this is full of juicy, good stuff. Think of them, send it to them, and just send them a little note saying, hey, I just watched this podcast or listened to this podcast and I thought of you. I think you'd enjoy it. That way we can share these messages around and we can help more people benefit from this kind of stuff as well. And when that being said, thanks for joining us and we'll see you on the next episode.